A pair of glowing eyes emerged from the alley. Not human. A dog. Fur matted, ribs visible, nose to the wind. He paused, sniffed the air again. And then he ran. The freezing night wasn't over yet, but a baby's life had just found its only chance. The temperature in the small rural town of Pine Grove had dropped below 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Weather alerts scrolled across TV screens and phone notifications all evening. Winter storm. Evan. Blizzard warning in effect. For most, the night meant fireplaces, wool socks, and warm beds, but not for the dog who had no name. He didn't have a collar, he didn't have a home, he only had instincts. And on this night, those instincts would change everything. The dog, a lean mutt with the body of a shepherd and the coat of something long abandoned, had been living near the abandoned rail yard just outside of town. Rusted cars and forgotten machinery offered scraps of shelter, and if he was lucky, the occasional discarded wrapper still smudged with grease. But food was scarce, warmth scarcer still. He'd been surviving, barely, for months. He was used to the quiet, used to being invisible. Until tonight. Tonight, something in the wind was different. He heard it before he saw anything. A whimper, a sound no storm could silence. 20 minutes outside Pine Grove, off the icy stretch of Miller's Ridge Road, headlights cut through the snow like ghostly eyes. Inside the car, 22-year-old Crystal Parker drove with both hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Her baby, Emma, just 6 months old, lay strapped in the car seat behind her, bundled in 2 layers of onesies and a pink knit hat. Crystal wasn't supposed to be out driving, especially not in a storm like this. But desperation is louder than reason. She was running. From a life that had cornered her. A boyfriend turned addict. Parents who stopped answering her calls. No job, no food, no help. She had packed a bag, strapped Emma in the car, and just left. She told herself she'd find shelter, that there'd be a 24-hour diner, maybe a church open for warmth. Just a few hours to think, to breathe. But the snow was relentless. The roads turned white. The signs disappeared into the blizzard, and when her tires hit black ice on a sharp curve, the car spun. It wasn't fast, it wasn't loud, but when the dust settled, her car sat nose first in a snowy ditch, engine smoking, one tire off the rim. Crystal tried the ignition. Nothing. The heater was dead. Her phone had 3% battery. No service. She stared at Emma. The baby blinked up at her, sucking her mitten. Then the cold started creeping in. The dog had no name, but the neighborhood kids had once called him Shadow. It fit. He was a shadow. He moved quietly, ducking human contact, appearing at dumpsters behind restaurants and vanishing before hands could reach for him. He trusted no one, except maybe the old man at the scrapyard. Al had worked the yard for 40 years. He was tough, quiet, and didn't have much left except a heater, a cot in the back office, and half a heart left after his wife passed away. Al started leaving scraps behind the shed every morning, and every morning Shadow came. They never got close, but trust, real trust, doesn't need words. That night, even Al stayed home. Shadow was alone. It was around 1 a.m. when Shadow's ears perked. Not the usual wind or the distant groan of old freight cars in the yard. A new sound. Soft, urgent, like nothing he'd ever heard before. He stood, head tilted, sniffed, a cry. Far away, muffled by snow. A human sound. A baby. Shadow stepped into the blizzard. Crystal had wrapped Emma in her own jacket. Her arms were turning purple from cold. She opened the door and screamed into the storm, her voice cracking, breath forming ice. In the air, but there was no one, no headlights, no cell service. She knew what hypothermia looked like. She had read enough stories, babies freezing in the backs of broken-down cars. She couldn't let that happen. So she did the unthinkable. She kissed Emma on the forehead, whispered, "Mommy will be back," and placed her in a small bundle, under a fir tree just feet from the road. She thought maybe, just maybe, if someone drove by, they'd see her. She ran toward the tree line, hoping to find a house, a light, anything. The snow covered her tracks within seconds. And then, silence. Shadow followed the scent first, then the warmth. His paws crunched over the thick snow, stopping every few feet to sniff the wind again. Then he saw it. A small bundle. No. Movement, just a soft sob, nearly gone. He approached carefully. Steam rose slightly from the baby's breath. Her fingers twitched. The blanket had started to slip. Shadow stared, then did something no one expected. He lay beside her, wrapped his body around her tiny frame, and stayed. Officer Natalie Reyes had drawn the short straw, night patrol in the worst storm of the season. Her SUV moved slowly along the back roads, tires struggling against the ice. She was about to call it in early when her headlights caught something. Movement. A large shape by the road. She slowed, pulled over. At first, she thought it was a coyote, but as she stepped out, flashlight in hand, she saw the truth. A dog, wrapped around a baby. Officer Reyes radioed in backup, wrapped the baby in an emergency blanket, and carried her into the warm vehicle. Her hands were trembling, not from cold, but shock. The baby was alive, barely. She looked back. The dog had not moved. He stared at her, unsure. Then slowly, he followed. Emma was rushed to Pine Grove General. Mild hypothermia, dehydration, but alive. The nurses couldn't stop talking about the miracle. A stray dog saved her? Who does that? He's a hero. The story made its way to local news within hours. Shadow sat quietly in the waiting room, too nervous to go near anyone. He didn't understand the cameras, the noise, the attention. But every time Emma cried, his ears perked. Every time she gurgled, he looked up. Like he knew she was his now. By morning, the story had hit social media. Stray dog found guarding. Abandoned baby in blizzard. Both survive. Thousands of shares, offers. To adopt the dog flooded in, but Officer Reyes had already spoken to the hospital board. He stays with her, she said. They belong together. In the darkest hour of the coldest night, a dog with no name became a guardian angel, and a baby, with no one left, was no longer alone. But this was just the beginning. The search for Crystal, the secrets of that night, and the bond that would change a town forever. It was only getting started. By 6:45 a.m., the storm had slowed to a light flurry. The horizon was painted with soft pinks and purples, a deceptive beauty over a night that nearly ended in tragedy. In the emergency room of Pine Grove General, the hospital's small team buzzed with cautious hope. Baby Emma, wrapped in heated blankets and IV tubes, had made it through the night. Her core temperature had stabilized. She was breathing better. Nurses took turns peeking into her room between shifts, drawn not just by the miracle, but by what lay at her bedside. The dog. He hadn't left. After pacing the hallway through the early morning, ears twitching at every monitor beep, Shadow had curled up beneath Emma's crib. His head rested between his paws, but his eyes never closed. He was still on duty, and outside those hospital walls, Pine Grove was waking up to the story that would define it for years. Officer Natalie Reyes was only half an hour into her post-storm paperwork when her phone rang. "Reyes," she answered, expecting a typical morning update, but the voice on the other end belonged to Denny from Pine Grove FM, the local radio station. "Natalie, you're going to want to check your email," he said breathlessly. "The video's gone. Viral. I think we just hit 20,000 shares. What video? The baby, the dog. Someone from the ER staff posted a clip. She clicked the link. It showed the moment Reyes had first walked into the ER carrying Emma. The camera, likely a hallway security feed, had picked up Shadow trailing her, snow still frozen on his fur, looking like a wild thing straight out of a winter fable. In the corner of the screen, a nurse's gasp could be heard. Then the murmurs, "Is that a stray dog? He stayed with her? Oh my God." Reyes didn't even finish the clip. She stood up and grabbed her keys. By 8 a.m., the Pine Grove Herald had changed its front page. Local stray saves abandoned infant from storm subhead. Dog refuses to leave baby's side, both now safe. It was a story that hit every emotional nerve, a helpless baby, a loyal, nameless protector, a snowstorm, a second chance. The AP picked it up within the hour. By noon, CNN and USA Today were requesting interviews. But none of that mattered to Shadow. He didn't know about the articles, or the cameras, or the people whispering hero when they passed by. He just knew that Emma smelled safe, and he wasn't going anywhere. Dr. Maureen Kessler, head pediatrician at Pine Grove General, stood at the press conference outside the hospital that afternoon. She was known for her clinical tone and zero tolerance for drama, which made what she said next all the more powerful. There is no medical reason this baby should have survived out there for more than 30 minutes in those conditions, she said, plainly. But she did, because that dog kept her warm enough to make it through the night. There is no other explanation. Behind her, inside room 3B, Emma blinked up at the ceiling. Her tiny hand reached outward toward the fur just under her crib. Shadow raised his head slowly, pressing his snout toward her fingers, and the room fell silent again. But miracles have shadows of their own. While the town celebrated the survival of baby Emma, Officer Reyes and her department had another task: finding Crystal Parker. There were questions no amount of good press could avoid. Why was a baby abandoned in a blizzard? What had happened to the mother? Was it a crime or a desperate cry for help? The first break came from a single cold track leading off Miller's Ridge Road. About a mile into the woods, a boot print. Then more, and then nothing. The storm had buried the trail. But Reyes remembered something Crystal's mother once told her. Back in high school, the Parker girl used to run to an old cabin in the hills when she felt overwhelmed. Her grandmother's hunting shack, long abandoned. Reyes circled it on the map. Crystal Parker's fingers were blue. She had collapsed beside a rusted cot, face down, barely conscious. The cabin had no heat, but it was shelter, 4 walls, a roof, and the illusion of safety. She had wandered in circles before finding it, driven by instinct and a kind of half-crazed determination. Her body had shut down hours ago, but her mind kept whispering, "Go back, find Emma, go back." But her legs wouldn't move, so she lay there, eyes open, knowing she had failed, until the door burst open. 2 figures in winter gear rushed in. One of them, Officer Reyes. Crystal barely lifted her head. Is she? Reyes crouched down, pulled off her gloves, and held Crystal's frozen hand. She's alive, thanks to a dog. Crystal wept until the world disappeared again. Back at the hospital, the ER staff was trying to decide what to call their 4-legged guest. Suggestions flew across the nurse's whiteboard. Snowy blizzard, lucky miracle. But when Logan, a 6-year-old patient recovering from pneumonia, saw the dog through his window, he walked out of his room in his hospital gown and said, "That's not a dog. That's a shadow guardian." The nurses blinked. "Shadow," he repeated. "Like from the storybooks. The one that protects the hero when they don't even know they're in danger." The name stuck. Shadow. Fitting for a dog who appeared like one, protected like one, and disappeared just as quickly into the background. Within days, the town had mobilized. Local vets volunteered to give Shadow a full medical checkup. A rescue group offered to cover his food for life. The mayor called him an honorary citizen of Pine Grove. But still, no one could get too close. Shadow let Reyes near him, and only her. She sat with him every day in the waiting room, bringing small bits of food, watching as he licked Emma's fingers through the bars of her crib. "I don't know who hurt you," she whispered one night. "But you didn't let it stop you from saving someone else." As Crystal slowly recovered in a hospital bed 3 floors above, the media had started to ask deeper questions. Who was she? Why had she abandoned the baby? Was she a criminal or a victim herself? Officer Reyes knew she couldn't answer that yet. Not until Crystal could talk. Not until the full story came out. But she knew this. Whatever Crystal had done, whether in panic, fear, or confusion, it was not the act of someone who didn't love her child. You didn't cry like that. You didn't ask about the baby with your last breath, unless you loved her more than yourself. 3 days after the storm, Emma was transferred to the pediatric recovery unit. Shadow walked beside her crib as it rolled down the hall. The staff watched in silence as the two of them passed by. A baby who had no idea she'd survived a blizzard, and a stray dog who refused to leave her side. Some of the doctors whispered about therapy animals, but this wasn't therapy. This was family, and Emma would never be alone again because Shadow had chosen her, and heroes don't leave the ones they save. When Crystal opened her eyes again, it was to the sterile smell of antiseptic and the soft hum of hospital monitors. The warmth of heavy blankets weighed on her, but the cold still clung to her bones. Not the kind you feel on the outside, but the kind that lives deep inside, in the corners of your mind. She blinked at the white ceiling, unfamiliar yet strangely peaceful. Then she remembered the storm. "The baby! Emma!" Her body jolted upright. "Easy," came a voice. Officer Reyes sat beside the bed, coffee in one hand, a nurse call button in the other. She leaned forward. "She's alive." Crystal's mouth moved, but no words came. Tears rolled from her eyes before any sound did. "You did what you could," Reyes added gently. "But you need to tell me what happened." Crystal turned away, burying her face in her hands. "I didn't know what else to do," she whispered. "I thought it would be quick. I thought maybe someone would find her before it got bad." "And the dog?" Reyes asked. Crystal shook her head slowly. "Dog? What dog?" In the days that followed, Crystal began to speak, not in long confessions, but in fragments. From those fragments, Reyes and the hospital counselor began to piece together a story far more tragic than anyone had guessed. Crystal had grown up in Pine Grove. Her parents divorced when she was 12. Her father left, her mother spiraled into opioid addiction. By 17, Crystal was couch surfing with relatives and barely made it through high school. Then she disappeared for 3 years. When she returned, pregnant and alone, she moved into a one-room apartment above Harlan's auto body and took a job as a night cleaner at Pine Grove Elementary. No one really asked questions. No one really noticed. She named her daughter Emma and told no one who the father was. What no one realized was that behind Crystal's quiet strength was a storm she couldn't control. No money, no childcare, no support system. The stress, the isolation, the postpartum depression. It ate away at her until the night she broke, a night that nearly killed her baby and would haunt her forever. "I put her in the carrier," Crystal recounted in a flat voice during her second interview. "I wrapped her in 2 blankets, gave her the last clean bottle I had, and started walking." "Why the woods?" Reyes asked. "I didn't want someone to find me. I just wanted them to find her." She looked up, eyes red. "I figured someone might hear her cry, or maybe a snowplow would come through. I didn't want her to die. I didn't. But I couldn't keep her. I was... I was losing my mind. Reyes stared at her, quiet. Crystal, she said carefully. Do you remember seeing a dog? A dog? Crystal repeated. No, there was nothing, just snow. But there was a dog, a stray. He found her and stayed with her all night. That's the only reason she survived. For the first time, Crystal let herself cry, not out of guilt or fear, but out of awe. I prayed, she whispered. I said, God, if you're there, send someone. I guess he did. Back at the hospital, Shadow had become something of a celebrity. Every news station, blog, and TikTok influencer wanted to know more about the miracle dog of Pine Grove. But there was one problem. Nobody knew where he came from. Animal control had scanned him for a chip. Nothing. No collar, no tags, no scars to suggest a past of abuse, but also no signs of grooming, no training, no familiarity with toys or commands. He was a ghost. Vet techs took blood samples. Volunteers combed through missing pet reports from nearby towns. A few false leads popped up, families claiming he might be theirs, but none matched his age, behavior, or appearance. As far as Pine Grove knew, Shadow had simply appeared the night he was needed, and that made him even more special. With Emma stable and Crystal under evaluation, the town's attention shifted to what would become of Shadow. The staff had been sneaking him treats. Children left drawings taped to the hospital wall, crayon sketches of a black dog with angel wings. Local animal shelters offered to take him in, but none had the space or calm environment he'd need. And then a surprising offer came through. Mrs. Delaney, the school librarian, offered to foster him temporarily. She had a quiet house on the edge of town. No pets, no kids. Just books, radio jazz, and a big yard with pine trees. Reyes escorted Shadow there herself. You're a legend now, she told him as she clipped the makeshift leash around his neck. Try not to eat her curtains. Shadow didn't pull. He walked beside her, silent and steady as always. And when they reached Mrs. Delaney's front porch, he sat down politely, as if he understood this was a transition, not forever, but a place to rest. By the end of the week, the story had exploded across national media. Good Morning America ran a segment titled, Frozen but Not Forgotten, Miracle Pup Saves Infant. A Netflix producer sent an inquiry about documentary rights. Children's book author called the town asking to license the name Shadow. But none of that felt real to Officer Reyes. What felt real was standing in the quiet of the hospital nursery, watching Emma sleep, her breath light, her face peaceful, while a toy dog sat by her crib, a placeholder for the real hero. What felt real was listening to Crystal's broken voice on the other end of the recovery floor, asking if she could see her daughter just once. What felt real was knowing that, despite everything, 2 lives had been saved, and a third, Crystal's, might still be salvageable. Child Protective Services opened an investigation. Crystal was still considered Emma's legal guardian, but the hospital psychologist recommended temporary removal while a deeper mental health evaluation could be completed. Crystal didn't fight it. I don't deserve her, she said softly, but Reyes shook her head. You made a mistake, Crystal, but you didn't leave her to die. You left her hoping someone would find her. That's different. The social worker nodded. If she cooperates with therapy, there's a chance she could reunite with Emma. Crystal didn't cry. She nodded and said, Then that's what I'll do. For the first time, she had a plan, a path forward. All thanks to that weekend, the town threw a winter festival in Shadow's honor. A stage was set up in the town square. A local baker made dog bone cookies. Kids painted paw prints on the snow. The mayor unveiled a plaque to Shadow, the silent guardian who saved a life. Shadow himself didn't love the attention. He kept close to Officer Reyes's side, eyes wary, But when she knelt beside him and gave him a scratch behind the ear, he closed his eyes just for a second and leaned in. For one afternoon, the town didn't talk about politics or budgets or potholes. They talked about hope and about how one act of loyalty could change everything. In the weeks that followed, Emma was placed in temporary foster care with a nurse who'd been there the night she arrived. Crystal began therapy and attended every parenting class the court ordered. Shadow, surprisingly, began to soften. He allowed Mrs. Delaney to brush him. He sat calmly during vet visits. He even wagged his tail once when Emma's picture was shown to him. Officer Reyes visited all three of them every week, and every time she saw a little more light return. On a rainy Tuesday in late March, Crystal was finally allowed to see Emma. The supervised visit was held in the foster home's sunroom. Emma, now almost 6 months old, sat in a swing, watching the world with wide eyes. Crystal approached slowly, unsure if her daughter would recognize her. But Emma didn't cry, she just stared, then reached out, and Crystal, tears slipping down her face, held her baby again. Outside the window, a black shadow paced the yard. Reyes had brought Shadow along, hoping he might like the drive. He stopped at the window, his nose pressed against the glass. Emma turned toward him, and for the first time in weeks, smiled. It was the beginning of something new, not perfect, not easy, but real. And it all began with a dog who didn't walk away. Spring arrived in Pine Grove not with a burst of color, but with slow drips and muddy roads. The last patches of snow retreated to the forest shadows, and the air hung heavy with the scent of thawed earth and growing things. In the middle of it all, Emma was crawling. Not far, not fast, but enough to chase sunlight that pooled on the bed floor or reach for the jingling bell of a stuffed animal. Her strength had returned. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity. The bruises and frostbite had healed, but the world around her was still adjusting. So was Crystal. She had been granted supervised visits twice a week, which began with quiet hours of singing lullabies and feeding formula from bottles carefully. Prepared by the foster nurse Dana, Dana was a firm but kind woman who insisted on boundaries. "She's not yours yet," she'd say without cruelty. "But that doesn't mean you can't love her like she is." Crystal respected that. She had no illusions. She was no hero in this story. But maybe, if she worked hard enough, she could still be someone her daughter could grow up proud of. Crystal's life became a rigid routine. Mornings, therapy sessions, 3 days a week at Pine Grove Behavioral Center. Afternoons, part-time custodial job at the high school, a different one than before. Evenings, parenting classes online, journal assignments, and long walks with Officer Reyes when the weight of everything became too much. Reyes had become more than a cop. She was now a friend, a mentor, a constant. "You don't have to fix everything in 1 month," Reyes told her once while they walked past the now famous patch of woods. "Just don't quit." Sometimes Shadow came with them. The dog had stayed with Mrs. Delaney, but he had bonded tightly with Reyes, too. They'd developed an unspoken arrangement. Reyes handled public appearances. Delaney handled domestic life. Shadow, for his part, seemed content as long as he could split time between them both. He was no longer a mystery. He was just home. 1. Rainy evening. Crystal arrived early for her visit and found Dana waiting by the porch with a curious expression. "There's someone here," she said. "Well, something." Shadow sat in the foyer, tail flicking slowly on the hardwood floor. He had walked straight up the porch stairs and nudged the door with his snout until Dana opened it. He refused to leave. Crystal stepped inside, her heart thudding. He didn't move, just stared at her, those strange amber eyes calm, ancient. "Do you remember me?" she asked softly. Shadow padded forward. She tensed, unsure if guilt had made her imagine his importance. But the dog simply leaned into her hand, pressing his forehead against her palm. For the first time since that horrible night, Crystal wept without shame, and Shadow stayed. As spring stretched towards summer, the state's Child Welfare Office scheduled a hearing to review Crystal's progress. Dana testified in her favor. The court therapist did too, but it was Officer Reyes who made the most powerful statement. She didn't walk away from responsibility. Reyes told the judge, "She's running toward it, every single day." The judge remained silent for a long moment before nodding. Supervised visits will continue, but as of June 1st, the mother will be permitted weekend stays with her daughter at the supervised transitional housing unit. It wasn't full custody, but it was a beginning. That night, Crystal whispered to Emma while rocking her to sleep, "I'm coming back for you. For good. I swear." Shadow sat beside the rocking chair, silent and vigilant, as if he were the promise, incarnate. The town of Pine Grove had not forgotten. By summer, the local school painted a mural in the courtyard, a winter forest, a sleeping baby wrapped in blue, and a black dog curled beside her like a guardian spirit. Crystal stood in front of it one day after picking up her paycheck from the school office. She touched the edge of the wall with her fingers. A group of second graders approached. "Are you the baby's mom?" one little girl asked shyly. Crystal hesitated. "I'm trying to be," she replied. "That's cool," said another. "The dog's name is Shadow. He's like magic." Crystal smiled. "Yeah, he really is." The first weekend Crystal and Emma spent together at the transitional housing unit felt like the most fragile, perfect dream. The space was small, a two-room suite in a converted Victorian house operated by a non-profit, but it was warm, safe. Crystal laid out baby clothes, bottles, diapers, toys. When Emma arrived with Dana, Crystal opened the door. With trembling hands, Emma didn't cry. She reached toward her mother, clutched her shirt, and pressed her head into her chest. It was enough to break Crystal all over again, but this time in the best way. Shadow sat on the porch outside. He refused to come in, but wouldn't leave either. All night, through the monitor's crackle and the soft coos of a baby sleeping beside her, Crystal could hear the occasional padding of feet on the wood. She slept with peace for the first time in months. Meanwhile, Officer Reyes hadn't given up on the mystery of Shadow's origin. Using local tips and dog tracker databases, she followed a lead to a town over 80 miles away. There, she found a missing pet report filed nearly 2 years prior. The dog's name had been Jet. He'd belonged to an elderly veteran who had passed away suddenly during the pandemic. Family members hadn't known where the dog went. They'd assumed he was taken in by a neighbor or possibly run off during the estate cleanup. But the photos matched. Reyes showed them to Shadow, who didn't react much, but nudged the one of the old man with his nose. So she made a decision. She closed the case and wrote in her report, "No longer." By the end of the summer, Crystal had completed every requirement the state could throw at her: parenting certification, mental health milestones, clean drug screens, proof of stable income. But there was one thing left: permanent housing. She couldn't take Emma back to the crumbling attic above the auto shop. She needed a new start. Reyes stepped in again. Through a town redevelopment grant, they secured a small rental house near the elementary school. Freshly painted, 2 bedrooms, a fenced yard. Crystal cried when she saw it. The first piece of mail she received at the new address came a week later. It was a simple card, no return address. Inside was one sentence: "Heroes come in many forms. Welcome home." And beneath it, taped to the card, a small black paw print. September arrived with golden leaves and crisp mornings. Crystal stood outside the courthouse, holding Emma in her arms, when the judge made the ruling. Full custody restored. Reyes hugged her. Dana smiled, blinking back tears. Shadow, wearing a red bandana, stood on the courthouse steps like a statue. When Crystal and Emma walked out the doors together, the town was waiting. People clapped. Some cried. It wasn't a parade, but it might as well have been. Shadow walked beside the stroller all the way to the car, and that night, for the first time ever, Emma slept in her own crib, in her own room, in her own home, her mother beside, her guardian watching from the foot of the bed. This wasn't a fairy tale. There would still be bills, sickness, hard days, teething, tantrums, doubt, but it was real, and it was earned. Crystal Parker became a quiet symbol of redemption in Pine Grove. She never sought attention, never gave interviews, but people knew. And every time someone saw a black dog trotting beside a stroller in the park, they remembered the miracle, the baby, the mother, and the silent dog who never left her side. Some called it fate, others called it instinct. But for those who had seen it unfold, it was something simpler. Love. In its purest form, autumn's embrace settled over Pine Grove like a soft sigh, golden leaves swirling in the wind, chimney smoke drifting lazily through crisp air, and children's laughter echoing down streets, lined with pumpkins. For Crystal and Emma, life had found a rhythm. Each morning began with a bottle and a cuddle. Shadow would trot alongside Crystal as she pushed Emma's stroller through the neighborhood, exchanging nods with mail carriers and smiles with neighbors. For once, the world felt quiet, safe, but not far beyond the edge of that peace. Deep in the forest where the frost still clung to the roots and ravines, stayed shaded until noon, someone else had taken notice of Shadow's story, and his name was Marcus Dale, though few in Pine Grove would know it yet. A transient man, mid-40s, unkempt beard, a limp in his left leg, known to camp in forgotten stretches of woods and travel under the radar. He had heard the story secondhand in a gas station 3 towns over, the stray dog that saved a baby during a blizzard. It had gone viral. The locals called him Shadow, others called him a miracle. Marcus called him something else. Mine. The dog, he believed, had once belonged to him, maybe not by leash or papers, but in spirit. He followed me once, Marcus muttered to himself, dragging a pack through the underbrush. He'll follow me again. And so he came to Pine Grove. No one saw him arrive. No one would know he was there, not at first. But Shadow would. It started with unease. The way the wind shifted direction suddenly on walks, the way Shadow would stop in the middle of the trail, ears perked, head tilted, eyes narrowed into the tree line. Crystal noticed it on a Thursday. They were halfway through their usual morning loop near Forest Hollow, the stretch where Emma would usually nap, when Shadow froze, not growled, not barked, just froze. His gaze locked on a thicket of briars, his hackles raised slightly. Then, after a long pause, he turned and gently bumped Emma's stroller with his snout, urging Crystal to move faster. Okay, she said, nervously. Let's go. By the time they reached the house, Shadow was pacing the porch, glancing back down the road. Something was watching them, and Shadow knew it. The next morning, Crystal found faint boot prints along the fence line of her yard. They were half melted by dew, but unmistakable. Large, heavy impressions, not her neighbors. Not the mailman's, not Reyes's, just one set. Leading toward the house and then back into the woods. Crystal's blood ran cold. She called Reyes immediately. The officer arrived within 10 minutes, silent and alert. Could be a hunter, she said, kneeling to examine the marks. Could be a wanderer. Could be nothing. But the look in her eyes said otherwise. Shadow stood beside them, tail rigid, gaze locked on the forest beyond. "Whoever it is," Reyes added, "Shadow doesn't like them." Crystal swallowed. "Should we be worried?" "Not if you keep your doors locked, and keep him close." That weekend, Crystal installed motion lights. She fixed the back gate, bought pepper spray, double-checked the baby monitor range, and made sure every window latched shut. It was a strange feeling, not fear exactly, but the eerie premonition that something old was inching back into her new life. Shadow refused to sleep in his usual spot by the front porch. Instead, he curled up beneath Emma's crib, only emerging to eat or follow her on walks. He was always watching, waiting. Crystal started having dreams of snowstorms and footprints, of trees bending toward her with hollow whispers, of a figure in the dark calling a name not hers. "Come here, boy." Reyes began an investigation. She checked local shelter cameras, had the dog scanned again for chips, still none. Traced every online missing pet post from the last 5 years. Then she found something odd. A shelter in northern Colorado, over 200 miles away, had a record of a black German Shepherd mix who resembled Shadow. Found 3 years ago, malnourished, injured, never claimed. The intake notes included a name, scribbled in pencil. Dog brought in by Monsieur Dale. Reyes sat back, eyes narrowing. She printed the 4. That evening, Crystal sat on the porch steps as Reyes handed her the paper. This man, Marcus Dale, may have had him once, years ago. I don't think it was a happy situation. Crystal looked down at the record, feeling something twist inside her. "You think he's here now? Watching?" "I don't know. But I want you to be ready." They sat in silence for a long moment, Shadow resting his head on Crystal's knee. Then Reyes added softly, "There's a reason he chose you that night in the woods." Crystal looked down at Shadow. He gazed back with those same ancient, silent eyes. "Yeah," she whispered, "there is." On Sunday, just after sunset, a call came in to the Pine Grove Fire Department. Smoke in the woods. Reyes was already halfway there when dispatch confirmed it. A small encampment near the ravine, burned to ash. No injuries, no structures lost. But something had been left behind, a makeshift lean-to, burnt sleeping bags, a can of dog food, and a scrap of paper with a note scribbled in erratic handwriting. "You stole what was mine." But he remembers. They always remember. No name, no signature, just ash. Pine Grove held a candlelight walk for the dog who saved the baby that same week. It had been 6 months since the rescue. Families came with dogs. Children wore paper snowflakes. Crystal held Emma on her hip as they stood in the town square under the soft glow of lanterns. Shadow didn't like crowds, but that night he stood still at Crystal's side, silent and calm. Someone passed her a candle. She lit it, and as she did, she whispered to Shadow, "Whatever storm comes, we're not afraid." He didn't bark, but he leaned his body into her leg, solid and real and warm, just like the night he found her baby in the cold. Back in the woods, far from the lights and songs, a figure stood in the shadows, wrapped in a heavy coat, eyes watching from the edge. He said nothing, made no sound. But Shadow turned his head slightly, just for a moment, as if sensing something ancient and unfinished drifting through the trees. Crystal didn't notice. Not yet. But the echo of something unresolved still lingered, and before the winter came again, the past would return, and bring with it another test, one that no one saw coming. Not even the dog who had already performed one miracle. December came quietly, as if the sky had tiptoed into Pine Grove overnight and left a soft white blanket behind. Trees stood bare, frosted with ice. Roofs glistened. Breath turned to vapor. The lake had started to freeze, a mirror of blue and white glass. Crystal found herself watching the weather reports more than usual, not for storms, but for signs. of something returning. She'd never told anyone, not even Reyes, about the feeling that haunted her sometimes in the dark hours, that someone had stood outside her window, just watching. Shadow had been restless since the fire in the clearing. Though he still curled beneath Emma's crib, he'd often rise in the middle of the night and pace the hallway, listening, waiting. One morning, Crystal awoke to find the front door unlatched, just barely. Emma was fine. Shadow was still in the house, but her stomach sank like a stone in cold water. Emma was crawling now, chubby knees thudding against the floor as she followed Crystal from room to room. Her laugh, bright and bubbly, filled the corners of the home. One afternoon, while the oven roasted vegetables and music played low, Crystal stepped outside for 30 seconds, just to toss a bag of trash into the bin. When she turned around, the front door clicked shut and locked. Inside the house, through the glass, she saw movement. Shadow, standing stiff and growling at the hallway. Then came a sharp thud from Emma's room. Crystal's scream echoed across the yard. She pounded on the door. "Shadow, let me in!" Inside, Shadow bolted out of view. Another bang, then silence. Seconds later, the lock clicked open from the inside. It was Reyes, who had just arrived for a visit and found the back door ajar. She rushed in and came face to face with Shadow, standing protectively over Emma, who was safe in her crib. But the window in her room was wide open. Snow had blown in, and there, beneath the sill, were footprints in the fresh powder. The police combed the woods again. More prints were found. A discarded scarf, a makeshift blind made from branches and a tarp. Someone had been living in the woods again. Watching, but this time, they'd gotten closer. Much closer. Crystal couldn't stop shaking, not from the cold, but from the realization that someone had tried to get in. To take her baby. If Shadow hadn't been there. "I think he saved her again," Crystal whispered to Reyes that night, cradling Emma in her lap. "I think he always knows?" Reyes agreed. "This isn't just instinct," she murmured. "This is something else." Reyes escalated the case to state authorities. Child Protective Services came by, not to investigate Crystal, but to evaluate the situation. They agreed the threat was real. A restraining order was issued for Marcus Dale, even though his location remained unknown. Motion sensors were installed. A hidden camera system. Crystal, unwilling to let fear rule her life, kept moving forward. But something inside her had shifted. The woman who had once left her front door unlocked while grabbing mail now checked every latch twice. Shadow barely left Emma's side, and she barely let him out of her sight. On the Che. Coldest night of the year, with temperatures dipping below 10 degrees Celsius. The power went out across their block. Transformer blue. Entire neighborhood darkened. Crystal lit candles. Huddled with Emma under thick blankets. Her phone had no signal. Shadow sat by the front door, tense. Then he rose and growled. Crystal peeked out the window. At the end of the street, a flashlight beam darting between trees, coming closer. A shadow behind the beam, limping. Marcus Crystal grabbed Emma and ran to the back of the house, heart pounding. She tried to dial 911. No bars. Shadow didn't wait. He bolted through the cracked side door and into the dark. What happened next became legend. Neighbors later said they heard snarling, a man screaming, then silence. Shadow returned 20 minutes later, bleeding from his shoulder. In his jaws, clutched like a trophy, a torn sleeve from a winter coat. Reyes and a K9 unit found the man near the ravine, barely conscious, arm broken, covered in bite wounds. It was Marcus Dale. When asked what happened, he muttered through swollen lips. He chose her. I called him. I called. He didn't come. He was mine. Then he passed out. Shadow's wounds were treated at the vet, deep punctures, some bruising. But he survived. Crystal stayed by his side overnight in the animal hospital. Emma on her lap, stroking Shadow's fur as he slept beneath a heated blanket. "You saved her again?" she whispered, tears falling onto his fur. "How many times will I owe you my world?" Shadow didn't answer. He didn't need to. His breathing slowed. Calm. Safe. The story went viral again. Hero dog thwarts. Kidnapping in the snow, local stations. National networks. Pet shelters began seeing surges in adoption rates. Crystal was offered interviews, book deals, even a reality show offer, all of which she declined. "We just want peace," she told one reporter. "He's done enough. Let him rest." And yet, Shadow's legend grew. A statue was commissioned by the town to be erected near the edge of Forest Hollow, where the first rescue had taken place. A plaque would read, "In honor of the Ji-un, the following weeks, Marcus Dale was transferred to a psychiatric facility, officially deemed unstable, with a history of trauma and paranoid delusions. He had been living off the grid for nearly a decade, and though he believed the dog was once his, no records ever confirmed it. Shadow never reacted to the name Marcus. Never. Looked for him. Never responded when the man called in the woods, but the moment Crystal called, the night of the blizzard, he had come running. That was the only truth. On Christmas morning, a year to the day since Shadow had rescued Emma in the storm, Crystal woke to the sound of barking. Not alarm, joy. She rushed to Emma's room and found the girl sitting upright, in her crib, grinning wide. Shadow was pawing at the gift boxes beneath the small tree they'd set up in the corner. Crystal laughed, tears in her eyes. They had made it, not just through one winter, but through the trials that followed, through darkness, danger, and doubt. And they had done it together, as a family. That morning, as snow began to fall again outside, Emma toddled over to Shadow, walking on her own now, and placed her tiny hand on his back. "Doggy," she whispered. "My doggy." Shadow leaned into her and wagged his tail. It had been a relatively peaceful stretch in Pine Grove since the night Shadow defended Emma from Marcus Dale. The man had been transferred far away, and the neighborhood slowly exhaled after months of tension. Crystal, Emma, and Shadow were back to their walks in the woods. Emma was now walking steadily, giggling as she toddled over icy sidewalks with Shadow beside her like a furry guardian. But nature has a way of reminding humans that peace is often temporary. That winter, meteorologists began warning of an unusual storm brewing off the coast, one unlike anything Pine Grove had seen in decades. They called it the Ice Devil, a freak convergence of Arctic air, lake-effect snow, and wind systems colliding with hurricane force. Crystal remembered standing at the window, watching the evening news while Shadow stiffened beside her. His fur bristled. He knew what was coming. The sky turned an eerie gray-green by morning, clouds heavy and low. The wind howled like 1,000 wolves, and then it began. Snow fell in sheets, so thick it swallowed vision within feet. Winds screamed through tree lines, snapping branches like twigs. Power lines came down in a shower of sparks. Within an hour, Pine Grove went dark. No power, no heat, no communications. Crystal had prepared as best she could, stockpiling food, batteries, blankets, but nothing could prepare her for how quickly cold took over the house. It seeped through the walls. Emma's cheeks turned pink, then red. Shadow growled softly every time the wind shook the windows. Then came a sound Crystal hadn't heard in over a year, a knock on the back door, 3 times. Then silence. Shadow exploded toward it, barking like thunder. Crystal rushed forward and saw it, a man, hooded, standing in the blizzard, and Emma's window, open again. Crystal grabbed the emergency flare gun she'd kept by the kitchen door and fired it through the back window without hesitation. The red flare screamed into the sky, lighting the trees like blood. The figure bolted. Shadow gave chase, but the snow was too thick, and within moments both disappeared into the storm. Crystal screamed his name, but the wind devoured her voice. Shadow was gone. Hours passed, then a full day. The police were paralyzed, roads impassable, trees collapsed. No one could mount a search until the storm passed, but Crystal couldn't wait. She bundled Emma into a carrier strapped to her chest, wrapped herself in every layer she owned, strapped snowshoes to her boots, and left a note in the kitchen. Gone. To find Shadow. Back soon. Please check on Emma if we don't return. She strapped Emma tight and walked into the blizzard, every step a prayer. Miles away, Shadow had tracked the man through the woods, over fallen logs, past frozen streams. Blood dripped from his paws, scraped on buried branches. The man had ducked into a small cabin, one of the old ranger stations no longer in use. Shadow circled it for hours, barked, growled, scratched at the door. Inside, the man stared back, but he wasn't Marcus. He was younger, wilder, and he wasn't alone. In the corner, huddled in a blanket, was a baby. Not Emma, another child, a girl, pale, barely conscious, swaddled in makeshift cloth. Shadow pawed at the door, again. This time not in rage, but urgency. The child inside wasn't safe. Crystal stumbled through white blindness. At one point, she collapsed beside a frozen creek. Emma whimpered against her chest. "I'm sorry," Crystal sobbed. "I thought I could find him." Then, through the trees, a bark, faint. Then again. Shadow. Crystal pushed herself up, stumbled forward, and saw the cabin, smoke rising from a crooked chimney. She reached it, pounded on the door, only to be met with silence. Until Shadow reappeared from around the back, his fur covered in frost but his eyes bright. He led her around to a hole in the side of the wall. She crawled through. The man inside looked up, gaunt, wild-eyed. He held the baby in shaking hands. "She's not mine," he muttered. "I found her, at the tracks, 2 nights ago. Someone just left her." Crystal moved slowly. "I can help," she said. "Let me see her." The girl was maybe 10 months old. Blue lips, barely breathing. Crystal removed her own coat and wrapped the baby in it. She handed Emma to Shadow, who nuzzled against her, like a warm bed, and began resuscitation. The man dropped to his knees. "I thought if I stayed here long enough, someone would come." "They did," Crystal said. "He did." She looked at Est. The flare Crystal had fired had been spotted by a snow rescue team from a neighboring town who had finally reached Pine Grove. They followed snowmobile trails until they reached the cabin. Inside, they found 1 frostbitten woman, 1 frostbitten man, 2 babies, hypothermic, but alive, and a dog who refused to leave their side. They all made it back to Pine Grove that evening. Shadow had to be carried. But he never took his eyes off Emma, not once. The story exploded again. Dog saves family from record storm. Again. The girl they'd rescued was later identified as Mia, a child missing from a town over 40 miles away. Her parents had been searching for days, believing she'd been kidnapped. The man in the cabin was mentally ill, a loner who had likely rescued her from a train station after she was abandoned, then gotten lost himself. He was taken in for evaluation. Mia was reunited with her parents. And Shadow? He became the symbol of protection again. Weeks later, when the snow had finally melted enough to allow normal life to resume, Crystal and Emma joined the town's sledding day. Kids shrieked in joy as they raced down powdered hills. Crystal placed Emma in a small sled of her own, right beside Shadow. "Keep an eye on her," she teased. Shadow barked once, and down they went, girl and dog side by side, like they had been since the beginning. From blizzards and kidnappers to silent watchers and long-lost strangers, they had survived it all, and they would face whatever came next. Together. The winter had passed, leaving behind quiet, damp streets and melting drifts of old snow. Spring rolled into Pine Grove with the slow grace of green buds blooming and birds returning from long migrations. It brought warmth, hope, and questions. Crystal was cleaning the kitchen when the envelope arrived. It was hand-delivered. No stamp. No return address, just her name, Crystal Walker. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, old and yellowed. At the bottom, scrawled in pen, were 4 words that stole the air from her lungs. "She is not yours." The words haunted Crystal as she stared out the window that night. She remembered that freezing night nearly a year ago. How Shadow had led her to the baby in the snow. How Emma was wrapped in nothing but a torn blanket, her skin already turning blue. There had been no identification. No signs of family. Crystal had never gone public with Emma's arrival. Only a few people knew the child had come to her not through birth, but through rescue. She'd filled out the paperwork, fostered her legally, and hoped one day to adopt her. But now, someone knew, and they wanted Crystal to know they knew. Crystal turned to the only person she trusted absolutely, Officer Dana Marlowe. Over coffee in the quiet of the police station, Crystal unfolded everything. Dana listened silently. After a pause, she nodded. "We'll reopen the Jane Doe file, quietly." They revisited the site where Emma had been found. Snow was long gone, replaced with soggy soil and sprouting grass. Shadow sniffed around, confused but diligent. Then he barked, twice. He'd found something beneath a tree root, a second piece of the blanket Emma had been wrapped in. Crystal knelt beside it, hands shaking. It had a name tag stitched into the corner. Property of Little Star Orphanage. Little Star had been a privately funded children's home operating 40 miles outside Pine Grove. Records showed it had burned down 3 years ago under mysterious circumstances. No clear cause, no clear list of survivors. Dana pulled every report from the archives. Among the dozens of children listed as residents, one name was circled in red. Ember. Age, unknown. Found abandoned in a forest at 6 months. No family history. No records before her time there. No one ever claimed her, and no body had ever been found after the fire. Could Emma be Ember? Could someone from that place have survived and come looking for her? Crystal began noticing odd things. A car that lingered a little too long on her street. A man standing by the playground, watching Emma from behind sunglasses. She reported everything to Dana, who installed a motion sensor camera outside the house. One night, the camera caught a figure. Tall, lean, wearing a long coat, standing across the street for nearly an hour before vanishing into the dark. Shadow growled at the door that night, his ears pinned back, his body rigid. Something was coming. Dana received a confidential envelope from a retired fire investigator. Inside were photos from the orphanage fire, charred walls, collapsed beams, and one image that stood out, a child's crib, untouched by flames. Blankets perfectly folded, as if someone had removed the child before the blaze ever reached them. Another photo showed a group of orphans taken a week before the fire, toddlers and babies lined up in high chairs. Dana zoomed in. There, on the far left, with dark eyes and soft curls, was Emma. Same smile, same dimple. There was no doubt now. She had come from Little Star, but W. Crystal received a package 3 days later, this one wrapped in newspaper and string. Inside was a leather-bound journal. The first page read, "To the woman who saved her, I'm sorry." The entries that followed were erratic, emotional, the writings of someone struggling with guilt and fear. They spoke of abuse inside the orphanage, of children going missing, of experiments run by donors who never revealed their faces, and one child, a girl, who survived every illness, every condition. A child who healed faster than others, who never got sick, who cried when others were silent. Her name was Ember. The writer had smuggled her out the night before the fire and left her in the snow, knowing someone would find her. Crystal submitted a DNA test, both hers and Emma's, to a private lab Dana recommended. The results confirmed what they suspected. Emma wasn't biologically related to anyone in any known family database. Her genes had unusual markers, a unique mutation that scientists flagged as uncommon but not dangerous. She wasn't ill, she was different, stronger, more resilient. A miracle, the report said, or perhaps an anomaly. Crystal sat alone with Emma in her arms that night, staring into the baby's curious eyes. She wasn't hers by blood, but she had held her through storms, fed her from empty cupboards, sung her to sleep under candlelight when the power went out. Shadow lay beside them, his head resting on Emma's foot, eyes watching the door like always. Blood didn't make a family. Love did. And Crystal loved this child with her entire soul. She didn't care where Emma had come from. No one would take her away. The final scene of the chapter unfolds like a silent film. Night again, wind against the windows, Shadow sleeping, Crystal dozing on the couch with Emma on her chest. Outside, a man approaches the mailbox, places a single object inside. He doesn't enter the yard, doesn't linger. He walks into the dark woods behind the house, vanishing without a sound. The next morning, Crystal finds a locket inside the mailbox. Inside, a photo of a young girl in an orphanage uniform, and a slip of paper that says, "Keep her safe. They know what she is now." It had been 2 weeks since Crystal found the locket and the cryptic message, "Keep her safe. They know what she is now." 2 weeks of watching shadows stretch across her porch, of bolting doors even. In daylight, of sleeping with the baby curled under one arm and a kitchen knife within reach. Shadow was restless, too. Every sound sent his ears twitching. He'd begun pacing at night, not sleeping, often sitting at the window for hours. The hair on his back would bristle with no cause. He would growl at nothing. Even Emma had changed. She didn't cry when scared. She'd stare, wide-eyed, at the door when the wind howled and wrap her tiny fingers tighter around Crystal's thumb. It was as if she could feel what was coming. Crystal tried everything to make sense of it all. She called the private lab that had sent her Emma's DNA results. But the number was no longer in service. She contacted the fire marshal who had investigated the orphanage fire. He was gone, retired, moved without a trace. She even returned to the police station to speak with Dana again. But when she arrived, she found Dana's desk cleared out. The officer at the front desk said Dana had been transferred to a federal unit. No forwarding number. No email, just gone. All her bridges were vanishing. Crystal made the decision one sleepless night. She packed bags, clothes, baby formula, Shadow's food, a loaded flashlight, and all the cash she had. The locket, the DNA report, and the journal. Went into a zippered pouch. Her plan was simple. Leave Pine Grove. Disappear. Start over somewhere no one knew their names. But as she double-checked the bags, Shadow stopped her. He stood at the door, unmoving. He barked once, low and stern. Then, slowly, he growled. Not at the outside world, but at the hallway. Something was in the house. Crystal moved like ice, slow and terrified. She crept down the hallway with a flashlight. The baby monitor was silent. Emma still slept peacefully. Then she heard it, a single, soft creak above her head. The attic. Shadow was already climbing the stairs before she could think. She followed, heart hammering. At the top, the attic door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open. The air smelled of dust and something else. A metallic tinge, old like rust or dried blood, and then she saw it, a pair of footprints in the dust, not hers, not Shadow's, not recent, weeks old. Someone had been there, watching. In the corner of the attic was a dusty filing cabinet. Crystal swore she had never seen it before. Inside was a manila folder marked EM01. She opened it. There were medical files, photos, thermal scans, EEG charts. They were all of Emma, or rather Ember, different ages, different places. Her temperature remained unnaturally stable in cold environments. Her brain activity spiked when she was exposed to loud noises. Her immune system regenerated white blood cells faster than normal. There were notes. Subject resists typical sedation. Extreme cold tolerance noted again. No known relatives on file. Possible anomaly. And at the bottom, a government seal, U.S. Department of Experimental Child Research, DECR. Crystal felt sick. She tore apart the attic. Behind a beam, she found a small blinking light, a hidden camera. It had been transmitting somewhere. Crystal smashed it with a hammer. Then she stormed through the house and found two more, hidden behind a bookshelf, in the nursery vent. They'd been watching. Not just her, Emma. The moment she found the third, she realized how long this had gone on. The man in the woods, the fake DNA lab, Dana's transfer, the locket. It wasn't paranoia. It was real. That night, Crystal stayed up with Shadow, knife in one hand, phone in the other. Around 2:17 a.m., the porch light flickered once, then went out. Footsteps, crunching snow. Shadow bolted to the door. Crystal opened it. Standing there, under the soft, haunted glow of a half-moon, was a man in a gray coat, his face hidden by the hood. In his hand, a flash drive. He placed it on the steps, then raised both hands, palms out. "I'm not here to harm you," he said softly. "They're coming, and if you don't leave now, you won't be able to." He pointed at the sky. "They've tracked her here." Then he turned and vanished into the woods. Crystal inserted the drive into her old laptop. Dozens of folders. Government. Letterheads. Video files. One video showed a hidden lab, a room with glass walls. Inside, a child about Emma's age sat playing with blocks. Outside, scientists watched and took notes. The child cut her hand, and it healed in seconds. Another video showed men arguing, "We can't keep her here. If she's found, we're all going down. She's not human, not fully." The last video was a live feed of her own house. From earlier that week, they had access to her baby monitor, to her laptop camera, to everything. Crystal didn't wait for morning. She packed the car in minutes, grabbed Emma and Shadow, and hit the road. She avoided highways, stayed on back roads. No GPS, no credit cards, just instinct. She drove for hours until she reached a cabin once owned by her grandfather, deep in the mountains. No electricity, no phone line, no cameras, just trees, snow, and silence. She built a fire and held her daughter close. Shadow sat at the window, watching, waiting, protecting. Crystal had no idea what would happen next, but she knew two things. Emma was not just a lost child, and the people who were after her wouldn't stop. But she also knew that Shadow had found Emma for a reason, that they had survived storms and kidnappers and death itself for a reason. They were a family now, and this family would fight, no matter what came. In the shadows beyond, the trees, figures moved, but they would not touch her, not with Shadow on guard, not with a mother who would burn the world before letting them take her daughter again. The cabin stood silent beneath a sky smeared with stars. Snow had begun to fall again, gentle at first, like a soft blanket tucking the world in for sleep. Crystal watched it from the window, her arms wrapped tightly around Emma, who was fast asleep in a bundle of blankets on the couch. Shadow lay at the door, unmoving, ears alert. For days, there had been no signs, no black cars, no flickering porch lights, no strangers watching from the woods, only the quiet. But Crystal had learned that quiet didn't mean safety. Quiet often came just before the storm. Shadow hadn't slept. In 48 hours, he moved like a sentry, gliding from room to room with deliberate grace. He didn't bark anymore, only growled softly under his breath when something outside didn't sit right. He paced the window again, then froze. Eyes narrowed, head tilted. He saw it, a shimmer in the trees. Not a figure, not a car, a laser. Grid, just for a moment. Then it disappeared. He turned sharply to Crystal and gave a low, urgent bark. She understood immediately. They were no longer watching. They were coming. Crystal sprang into motion. She had already made a plan. In the closet, beneath a loose floorboard, was a bag she had packed for the worst-case scenario. Food, money, burner phones, a flare gun, and a small revolver given to her by her late grandfather. She stuffed Emma's things into a duffel and slipped on her boots. Shadow blocked the door, not out of fear, but instinct. She knelt down and cupped his face. "You know what to do if we get separated." His eyes locked with hers, filled with loyalty and something more, an understanding that this night might be his last. It started with a low hum, then a bright light exploded through the trees, white, silent, piercing. Shadow barked wildly. Crystal grabbed Emma and bolted to the back door, kicking it open. A drone zipped overhead. A man in tactical gear dropped from a tree. "Don't run! We're here for the child!" he yelled. Shadow lunged, teeth bared, body flying through the air like a missile. He took the man down with a bone-crushing snarl. Another figure fired a tranquilizer dart. Shadow twisted just in time, the dart grazing his side, but it was enough to slow him. Crystal screamed and ran. Crystal ran deeper into the forest. Emma pressed tightly against her chest, her breath ragged. Spotlights searched the trees. Voices barked orders. "Subject is fleeing. On foot! She's got the baby! She's not supposed to have the baby!" The words chilled her. "Not supposed to." What did that mean? Shadow caught up, bleeding from his side, limping but refusing to fall behind. They reached an old ranger station, long abandoned. She barricaded the door with a filing cabinet and shoved a table against the window. Then she checked Emma. The child stared up at her, utterly calm, glowing almost in the dim light. And Crystal realized something. The baby wasn't afraid. The soldiers reached the cabin minutes later. One stood at the door, issuing commands through a headset. "Do not harm the child. Do not shoot unless you're engaged. We retrieve, we extract. No one dies unless necessary." Inside, Crystal loaded the revolver. She had 5 bullets, and nothing to lose. Shadow stood beside her, teeth bared. The door burst inward. She fired once. Hit the leg of the first man through. Shadow took the second by the throat. Screams, shouting, flash-bang, explosion of light. Crystal grabbed Emma and ducked behind the couch. Then she felt it, a heat pulsing from Emma's skin. Time slowed. The room, filled with an eerie blue glow. Emma wasn't crying. She was humming. A sound no baby should be able to make. Ancient, strange, resonant. The soldiers stopped mid-movement. Their eyes went blank, and then one by one, they dropped their weapons. The entire cabin pulsed with energy, from the floor to the roof, every surface trembling with raw, invisible force. The light burst outward, blinding. When it cleared, everyone was unconscious, except for Crystal, Emma, and Shadow. Hours later, when Crystal dared to return to the cabin, it was empty. The soldiers were gone. Their vehicles vanished, not a single body, not a single footprint, just the locket. Left. On the front steps again. Inside was a note. She's chosen you. Underneath a drawing, a strange symbol, and 2 words, Project Genesis. A week passed. Then a letter arrived. No postage, no return address. It was from Officer Dana. In it, she apologized for disappearing. She had been pulled into a classified operation and was being watched. She warned Crystal that Emma was part of something ancient, that people in power believed she was a genetic key to surviving climate collapse, or war, or worse. They'll never stop looking, Dana wrote. But you've seen what she can do. She won't let you fall. Just love her. She chose you for a reason. The final line read, "The world will change because of her." A year later, Crystal lives on the edge of the northern pines under a new name. She works part-time at a ranger station and homeschools Emma, who is now talking, laughing, and learning at twice the normal rate. Shadow is older now, his muzzle touched with gray, but he still guards the house every night. Sometimes Emma stands on the porch and points at the stars. "They're looking for me," she'll whisper. But then she turns to Crystal. "And I don't want to go." Crystal pulls her close. "You won't. Not unless you want to." The wind howls. Shadow growls once and returns to his post. A dog who once saved a baby in the cold now guards something the world may never understand. A girl who could save all of humanity if they let her grow.